Zainab did not think grief would feel this quiet. She had always imagined that when loss came, it would arrive with wailing women, hot tears, neighbors beating their chests and throwing handfuls of dust into the air. But when Kola died, the world didn't stop. The sun still rose, the buses still honked, and Zainab, 5 months pregnant, stood still in the middle of it all, unmoving, unseen, undone. Kola had died in the early hours of a Wednesday. She had brought him hot pap the day before, gently balanced the flask on his bedside table at the hospital, and smiled when he told her, "It's just back pain, my love. I'll be home tomorrow." He had smiled weakly, the kind of smile that people wear when they are trying to hide something painful. She remembered thinking his skin looked too yellow, his eyes too tired, but she believed him. She had to. The next morning she met the doctor before she reached the ward. He wore the kind of expression that people put on when they're about to say something cruel with softness. "Mrs. Bellow," he had said, almost whispering. "We're very sorry." Those words fell like heavy rain on dry clay. And just like that, she was a widow. 28 years old with a child kicking gently inside her and no man to call her own. It wasn't just the death, it was the way it made everything else collapse. Kola had been the only reason his family tolerated her. And without him, she was just the girl from Ilorin who had brought nothing but a round belly and quiet manners into their well-to-do Lagos household. They did not even let her sit for long. His mother hadn't said a word at the hospital. But when she returned to the house with her hospital bag still slung over one shoulder, they looked at her like she had brought misfortune along with her flask of leftover pap. For 3 days, no one offered her food. Nobody asked if she had slept. She sat in the corner of the parlor like a guest at her own funeral. Then the words came like bullets from mouths that had long prepared them. "You came empty-handed and now you want to eat from a table you didn't set," said Ronki Kola's eldest sister with a mouth curled in contempt. "You used charm on my brother." "You killed him," said another. Zainab, shocked, but trying to remain calm, placed a trembling hand on her belly and whispered, "I'm carrying his child." "A child that hasn't even been born," Ronki snapped. "We don't know what you're carrying." The next morning they packed her clothes into 2 black nylon bags and threw them out by the gate. The gateman, who once called her Madam Lightskin, looked away when she pleaded with her eyes. Nobody defended her, nobody offered her fair money, just silence and slammed doors. So she walked, from Victoria Island to Surulere barefoot and broken resting every 10 minutes when her feet began to swell. And when she could no longer walk, she sat, right there beside a pepper seller and a newspaper boy who had seen too much of the world to be surprised by one more pregnant woman crying on the pavement. This was how Zainab's new life began, not with a bang, but with the slow crumbling of dignity. The kind of pain that doesn't shout, but settles quietly into your bones. The kind of loneliness that hums in your ear long after the traffic has passed. And yet, in all of it, she kept her hand on her belly, like a silent promise that she was not entirely alone. By the time Zainab settled into the corner beside the Danfo bus stop in Ojuelegba, the Lagos sun had already begun its slow descent. The heat was no longer fierce, but it lingered in the dust that clung to her wrapper, in the sweat beneath her arms, in the smell of burnt oil from a nearby akara cellar. She had been there for 2 days now. Maybe 3. Time had stopped meaning anything once she no longer had anywhere to be. No one noticed her, not really. The hawkers were too busy shouting, "Gala, gala, buy your gala," and weaving through buses that didn't believe in brakes. The conductors were too loud, their voices scraping through the air like old iron gates. Oja Legba, Palm Groove. One chance, one seat, people rushed by with determination in their steps, with destinations in their minds. Only Zainab sat still, a smudge in the corner of the city's canvas. Her hand always found its way back to her stomach. A small instinctive gesture, as though holding the unborn child made her feel less invisible. 5 months in the bump was clear beneath her faded Ankara gown. The cloth had once been bright lemon green with orange roses, but the colours had dulled like her hope. She had stopped praying, not because she didn't believe in God anymore, but because she was afraid he no longer noticed her. On her first day on the street, she had tried to keep her head up. She had smiled softly at an old woman selling bananas beside her, thinking kindness would be returned. But the woman had looked away, as if afraid Zainab's misfortune might be contagious. It was the pity that hurt the most. Worse than hunger. Worse than the aching in her back after sleeping on bare concrete. The way people looked at her, some with disgust, others with that awful, well-meaning sorrow in their eyes, made her skin crawl. She would rather be ignored. She became good at becoming small, folding herself into her corner, pulling her legs close, keeping her scarf tied tightly around her head. When the rains came in the evening, she didn't run. She let it fall, let it soak through everything, her scarf, her skin, her shame. It felt honest. She didn't beg, not in the beginning. Pride still had a voice in her throat then. But by the third night, when the baby kicked hard and her stomach growled louder than the honking cars, she stretched her hand. Softly, hesitantly, a man dropped N50 without looking at her. She held that note like a sacred thing, folding it 3 times and slipping it beneath her wrapper. What does a woman become when the world no longer sees her? She becomes still. She becomes quiet. She learns to read the rhythm of the street, which bus drivers are likely to splash puddles, which hawkers might offer a bruised orange at the end of the day. She memorizes faces that pass by at the same time every evening. The woman in heels with the red handbag, the man in kaftan who always buys the punch, the boy with one shoe. None of them see her, not really, but she sees them, and that somehow keeps her human. And so Zainab sat hand on belly, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. She did not know what would happen tomorrow, or the day after, or the day after that. All she knew was that she had nowhere else to go, and in that stillness, in that deep, unbearable quiet, she waited. It was the kind of afternoon Lagos kept to itself. The sky hung low and grey, like it was thinking of crying, but hadn't made up its mind yet. Traders had begun to pull their umbrellas close in case of sudden rain. The air was thick with the smell of roasted corn and impatience. Zainab sat in her usual corner beneath the old telecommunication pole beside the pepper seller with a voice like broken glass. Her legs were drawn to her chest, her eyes blank. Then the car came. A black SUV, the kind that made Okada riders slow down just to gawk, the kind that belonged to people whose shoes never touched puddles. It moved slowly, deliberately, then stopped, right in front of her. Zainab looked away. She assumed the driver wanted to ask for directions. That was common enough. People often mistook her for a street hawker. A hand reached out from the driver's window holding something, a white business card. "Madam," a calm voice said. She turned reluctantly. The man inside the car was well dressed, shirt crisp. No wristwatch, but the quiet confidence of someone who didn't need one. His face was kind, but not soft. The sort of man who could buy a house with a single phone call and still remember to say please to his driver. Zainab blinked, uncertain. "Good afternoon," he said. She replied quietly, "Good afternoon, sir." Her voice came out hoarse. She had barely spoken all day. "I have a proposal for you," he said. At first she thought she misheard. Proposal," she repeated, unsure whether to laugh or run. "Yes," he said. No smile, no flirtation. "My name is Idris. I have 2 daughters, twins. Their mother left when they were still crawling. I've been raising them on my own." Zainab said nothing. The card was still in his hand. "I need help," he continued. "Someone who can be patient with them, stay with them, care for them like a mother would. In return, you'll have shelter, food, safety, peace." He paused. The air between them seemed to hesitate. "Marry me," he said. "On paper only, nothing romantic. Just an arrangement for the sake of the children. You'll care for them. I'll care for you and your unborn child." Zainab stared. People walked past. Someone shouted change down the road. The pepper seller sneezed behind her. But none of it touched her. It was as though time had stepped aside, made room for something strange and holy. She opened her mouth. No words came out. This was not how things happened. Men like him did not stop for women like her, not unless they wanted something dark and temporary. But this man, this Idris, spoke like a man making a business decision. No emotion, no seduction, only clarity. "Take your time," he said gently, placing the card on the pavement beside her. "I'll pass this route again tomorrow." 8 a.m., and with that the window rolled up. The car eased away, and Zainab sat in the same spot, suddenly aware of the sound of her own breath. She stared at the card. Just a name, 5 letters Idris, and a phone number written so neatly it almost looked like a prayer. For the first time in days, she felt something stir inside her, not the child, but a thought, a possibility, fragile, daring. Maybe tomorrow would not be like today, maybe. The next morning, Zainab woke up before the sun. Not that she had truly slept. Sleep in her world was a fragile, twitching thing snatched between horn blasts and cold pavement. She had wrapped her scarf tight around her head during the night, not for warmth, but for dignity. In Lagos, even silence had witnesses. She stood and dusted off the back of her wrapper. Her stomach felt heavy, not just with the child, but with the weight of decision. She had held Idris's card in her hand all night. She had traced the edges with her thumb, like it might dissolve at any moment. By 7:45 a.m., she was standing. By 8:05 a.m., the black SUV returned. She did not wait to be called. She stepped forward as the window rolled down. "Good morning," she said, voice clearer, now steadier. Idris looked at her for a moment. "Did you think about it?" "I did," she said, hand resting on her belly. "I don't know what kind of man offers marriage to a stranger on the street." "And yet," he replied, unlocking the door, "you're here." She hesitated just for a second. Then she stepped in. The door closed with a soft click that sounded louder than it should have. Inside, the car was cool, the seats soft, the air smelling faintly of leather, and something expensive she could not name. Zainab sat stiffly, her hands folded in her lap. "I hope I'm not walking into a trap." Idris didn't look at her. No traps, just ground rules. He spoke like a man reviewing a contract. "You're not here to be a wife in the romantic sense. This is for the children. You will live in the house, take care of them. I'll provide for you and your baby. Respect is mutual. When the time comes, if you wish to leave, I won't stop you." Zainab nodded slowly. "Understood." The car rolled across Lagos past the markets and mechanics over the bridge at Ikoyi, where the water looked too calm for a city so loud. And then the car turned. The house stood behind a tall white fence. The gate opened soundlessly. Inside, flowers bloomed along the driveway as though they had been bribed to behave. A gardener swept the leaves into neat piles. The house itself was white, wide and serious, the kind of place where slippers never shouted on the tiles. Zainab stepped out like someone entering church barefoot. The last house she had entered was her mother-in-law's, and she had been thrown out of it with nothing but a nylon bag and tear-streaked cheeks. This one smelled of soap and lemon polish. A woman in uniform stood by the door holding a towel and looking curious. "Madam," she asked Idris, this is Zainab," he said simply. "She'll be staying with us?" The woman Amaka nodded and led her up the stairs. The hallway was painted a pale cream, the light filtering in through soft curtains. They reached a room with a large bed, pale green drapes, and silence so full it echoed. "This is too much," Zainab whispered. "Sir said to make you comfortable," Amaka replied, tone neutral, then left. Zainab sat on the edge of the bed like it might collapse. She touched the bedsheet, pressed the pillow. Then she placed both hands on her belly and cried. Not the sobbing of sorrow, not the whimper of fear, But the quiet, grateful weeping of someone who had known nothing but the cold concrete for weeks, and now had a door that closed behind her and a bed that did not judge. It was not love, it was not family, not yet. But it was shelter, and for a woman who had spent nights beneath the sky, that was more than enough for now. Zainab first heard them before she saw them, two voices shrill with the unapologetic certainty of children who had never tasted silence. They were arguing about juice. One insisted it should be in the pink cup, the other swore by the blue one. Amaka, the housekeeper, was muttering under her breath in the kitchen as though prayer might protect her from another tantrum. They are like fire and petrol, Amaka warned when Zainab stepped in to help, similar but always ready to explode. Zainab smiled faintly, unsure. Her body was still sore from sleeping on the ground for weeks, her spirit even more so. She had just begun to sleep through the night without jolting awake at the sound of tires screeching or drunk men shouting on the roadside. And now twins, 5 years old, identical in face but opposites in mood. Aisha was loud curious, always asking why as though the world owed her answers. Adara was quiet but firm with the kind of stare that made adults uncomfortable. Both girls had their father's sharp jaw and their mother's absence tucked somewhere behind their eyes. They did not warm to Zainab immediately. "Who is she?" Aisha asked on the first day, arms folded. "She's the new Auntie Idris," said simply. "She looks like she's going to cry," Adara observed, peeking behind her sister. Zainab stood still, unsure whether to laugh or retreat. She had never been called Auntie before by a child not related to her. She had never cared for anyone besides Kola, and now her unborn child. These girls were loud, unpredictable, and brimming with the kind of boldness life had long drained from her. The first few days were tests. They threw tantrums over socks. They refused to eat unless it was shaped like animals. They pushed buttons literal and emotional until Amaka locked herself in the kitchen and refused to come out for an hour. Zainab tried. She read storybooks with words she barely understood. She learned the different cries: hunger, boredom, attention-seeking. She didn't raise her voice, not once. Instead, she tried to listen. One evening, as they played in the parlor, Zainab noticed Adara pulling away from her sister, sitting alone, with a toy missing one arm. She walked over and sat beside her. No words, just presence. After a long pause, Adora looked up and whispered, "My mummy used to plait my hair like this," pointing to Zainab's thick braids tied into a bun. Zainab's hand instinctively touched her own head. "You miss her?" The little girl nodded. "I'm not your mummy," Zainab said quietly, "but I can stay if you want." That was the first moment the walls cracked. The next day, Aisha asked her to help with buttons. 2 days later, they argued about who would sit next to Auntie Z at breakfast. By the end of the week, they were slipping into her bed early in the morning, whispering secrets about monsters and classmates, and a teacher who smelled like onions. Idris noticed the change but said nothing. He watched from a quiet distance, eyes softening each time Zainab gently wiped a mouth or tied a shoelace without being asked. She didn't ask for permission. She didn't act like a substitute. She just showed up every day, quietly, fully, kindly. Zainab didn't know when it happened. But one afternoon, as she reached for the laundry basket, she heard it. Mummy, Aisha called, voice shrill. "I spilled juice again." Zainab froze. Adara peeked in from the hallway and added, "Mummy, come see. It looks like a map of Nigeria." And in that strange, sticky mess on the parlor floor, Zainab felt something shift, something ancient and new. Not blood, not law, not even love, just belonging. And for a woman who had been chased from every space she called home, that was everything. There are some kinds of love that do not knock on the door. They seep in like harmattan dust through half-shut windows, like the smell of ogbono from a neighbor's kitchen, slow, uninvited, but impossible to ignore. That was how it began between Zainab and Idris. He did not court her. There were no flowers, no sweetened words dipped in sugar and promise. There was only routine. Every morning she packed lunchboxes for Aisha and Adaura. She tied their shoelaces, kissed their foreheads, and waved them off. Every evening she folded tiny clothes, humming softly while the twins played. And sometimes when the house was quiet and the children had fallen into that deep sleep reserved for the innocent, Idris would find her on the veranda, sipping warm water, eyes distant. "You're still awake," he would say, more observation than question. "I like the breeze," she'd reply, and he would sit beside her, not close enough to touch, not far enough to ignore. Just there. They didn't speak much in those moments, but in the quiet, something passed between them, something careful, tentative. A respect born not from obligation but recognition of two people who had both been broken by life in different ways. Idris had scars of his own. Zainab sensed them. She could see it in the way he sometimes looked at his daughters not with joy, but with a flicker of fear, as though he was still unsure if he was doing this fatherhood thing right, as though every giggle from the girls was a tiny miracle he didn't deserve. One evening, while helping him sort through papers in his home office, Zainab found a photo, old, slightly bent at the corners. A young woman in an ivory jail holding a baby. Her smile was tired but beautiful. She was their mother, Idris said quietly, glancing over. She left when they were 2. Zainab didn't ask why. Some stories wear their pain too visibly to be retold. "I tried to do everything right," he continued. "But sometimes being present isn't enough." Zainab placed the photo gently on the desk. Sometimes, she said, being present is everything. After that night, the silences between them changed. They became warmer, softer. Zainab found herself laughing more at his dry jokes, at his terrible attempts to braid Aisha's hair on Saturday mornings. Idris in turn began to notice the little things, the way she cradled her belly before sleeping, the way she left small sticky notes on the fridge. "Boil yam. Don't forget their cough syrup. You're doing well." One of those notes stayed. He kept it in his wallet, a square scrap of yellow paper with smudged ink. "You're doing well, just that." And it meant more to him than any "I love you" ever had. They never spoke of romance. But there was a day, a quiet Thursday, when it rained steadily from morning till evening. The girls had fallen asleep on the living room carpet, curled around each other like sleepy cats. Zainab leaned against the kitchen counter, exhausted hair wrapped in a towel. Idris stepped in, holding a cup of tea. He didn't say a word, just handed it to her. Their fingers touched briefly. She looked up, and in that moment, under the flickering kitchen light, above the hum of rain and dreams, something was understood. Not declared, not demanded. Just known, and sometimes that is all that love needs. There was no kneeling with a ring under the stars, no saxophone music or flash mobs in matching agbada. The day Idris asked Zainab to marry him, the sky was grey, the twins were fighting over a crayon, and the house smelled of palm oil and wet laundry. He stood in the kitchen doorway, hands tucked into the pockets of his trousers, watching her stir okra soup with quiet efficiency. She wore an old wrapper tied around her chest. The print faded but familiar, her belly round now heavy with weeks and hope. "I was thinking," he said. She didn't look up. "About what?" He paused. "About the future." She stirred slowly, then turned off the gas. "Whose future ours?" he said simply. The word sat between them like a visitor neither of them expected. Zainab turned to face him, resting her hands on the kitchen counter. "You mean the contract?" "No," Idris replied. "I mean something real, something official." She blinked. "I want to marry you, Zainab. Not because you care for my daughters, not because you've kept this house breathing, but because I've come to value your presence more than I know how to say." She didn't cry. That was the surprising part. She had imagined, if such a moment ever came, that tears would fall like they do in Nollywood films. But instead her chest filled with stillness. Deep, Sacred. "I don't have a white gown," she said. Idris smiled. "I don't have a best man." They agreed on a date quietly, like two people choosing a market day. It would be a small ceremony at the family compound in Surulere. No trumpet, no crowd. Just the people who mattered, and even then not too many. Zainab borrowed a lace blouse from Amaka. Idris wore a crisp white kaftan newly ironed. The twins each carried a plastic flower and took their role as flower girls more seriously than expected. Aisha corrected the pastor's pronunciation at least twice during the vows. There was a moment just before the ceremony when Zainab stood in front of a cracked mirror in the compound parlor. She adjusted the jewel on her head and stared at her reflection. Her eyes were steadier now, her posture firmer. She no longer flinched at kindness. The woman who looked back at her was not a victim. She was not a widow, not a stray on the roadside, not someone to be pitied. She was becoming someone new. When Idris took her hand under the old mango tree where the pastor stood waiting, there were no speeches. Just a whispered vow, "I will not promise perfection, Zainab." Only presence. And she, with eyes glistening but dry, replied, "I will not promise obedience. Only partnership." They signed the marriage register on the hood of a parked car. Later, they sat on plastic chairs eating jollof rice with goat meat wrapped in foil. The twins danced barefoot to music coming from a Bluetooth speaker someone borrowed from the neighbor. A woman from the street shouted, "We thank Goddo," and clapped without knowing why. It was not a wedding to be retold in glamorous magazines, but it was a wedding that mattered, because it was quiet,